Welcome to Life Stories, where we bring you inspiring tales of courage, resilience, and transformation. Today, we follow the remarkable journey of Sophia Matthews, a woman who faced betrayal, heartbreak, and seemingly insurmountable challenges. Through her unwavering love for her children and her determination to reclaim her life, Sophia transformed her struggles into strength, becoming a beacon of hope for others. This story is a testament to the power of resilience and the unbreakable bonds of family. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to Life Stories to join us as we dive into Sophia's powerful journey. Let's begin today's story. Sophia Matthews took a deep breath as she stepped into the grand courtroom in downtown Manhattan. The polished wooden floors gleamed under the soft morning sunlight streaming through the tall windows. But their warmth did little to soothe her nerves. Each step echoed like a drumbeat, a steady reminder of the battle she was about to fight. She adjusted the cuffs of her modest blazer and straightened her back, willing herself to appear composed, even as her heart pounded fiercely in her chest. Michael Matthews sat across the room, his sharp navy suit pristine, his perfectly groomed hair and smug expression completing the image of a man utterly confident in his victory. He leaned back in his chair with a nonchalant air, his lips curling into a smirk that made Sophia's stomach twist. "She's nothing without me," he whispered to his attorney, his voice loud enough to carry across the room. Sophia heard him clearly, and the sting of his words hit her harder than she expected. It wasn't the first time Michael had dismissed her, diminished her, or made her feel small. But this time, his words didn't cut the same way. She was no longer the woman who cowered in the shadow of his success. She was here to fight for herself, for her children, and for the life she deserved. Sophia's attorney, Rachel Harrison, leaned over and whispered, "Remember, this is about Ethan and Lily. Stay calm and focused. We've got this." Rachel's voice was steady, her presence a pillar of strength for Sophia to lean on. Sophia nodded, her fingers gripping the edge of the table. Her mind wandered for a moment, pulled back to the years that had brought her here. She had been young, ambitious, and full of dreams when she first met Michael. He was magnetic, driven, and had a vision for his life that seemed so perfectly aligned with hers. They had built their life together, or so she thought. When Michael's career took off, she had willingly stepped back, choosing to support him, believing their partnership was an equal give and take. She remembered the nights spent editing his presentations, refining his pitches, and listening to him rehearse his speeches. She had given up a coveted position at a design firm to stay home with their children, convinced that her sacrifices were temporary and that Michael appreciated her unwavering support. But over time, something changed. The man who once praised her intelligence and compassion began to take her for granted. His loving words turned sharp and condescending. "You wouldn't understand," he would say when she offered her opinion. Or worse, "You should be grateful you don't have to deal with the stress of work like I do." Sophia had brushed it off at first, believing the stress of his job was to blame. She held on to the idea of the man he used to be, hoping he would find his way back to her. But the dismissive remarks grew more frequent, and the distance between them widened. The final blow came when Sophia discovered that Michael had been planning their divorce for months, siphoning money into hidden accounts, all while keeping up the facade of a devoted husband. When she confronted him, his reaction was chilling. "You think you can survive without me?" he sneered. "Good luck." Her resolve hardened as she sat in the courtroom now, those words echoing in her mind. This wasn't just about proving him wrong. It was about reclaiming her dignity and protecting the two people who mattered most, Ethan and Lily. The judge entered, her presence commanding the attention of the room. The proceedings began, with Michael's attorney launching an opening salvo designed to undermine Sophia's credibility. "Your Honor, we will demonstrate that Mrs. Matthews lacks the financial stability and emotional capacity to provide a suitable home for her children," he declared. Sophia swallowed hard, her gaze darting to Ethan and Lily seated quietly in the back of the room. Ethan, her teenage son, looked away when their eyes met. His expression guarded. She knew Michael had been whispering in his ear, planting seeds of doubt about her abilities. It broke her heart to see the distance in Ethan's gaze. But she reminded herself that she was here for him. For both of them. Rachel stood to respond. Her voice calm but firm. Your Honor, we will prove that Sophia Matthews is more than capable of providing a stable, loving home for her children. Her sacrifices for her family have been immeasurable. And the bond she shares with Ethan and Lily is unbreakable. Sophia exhaled, drawing strength from Rachel's confidence. She glanced at her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Her wedding ring long since removed, but the faint indentation still visible, a ghost of a promise that had been shattered. As the session progressed, the arguments became sharper, more personal. Michael's attorney painted Sophia as a woman who had squandered opportunities and leaned too heavily on her husband's success. Sophia absorbed the blows in silence, her composure unyielding. But as much as the accusations hurt, they also fueled her determination. She thought of the late nights soothing a teething Lily, the afternoons helping Ethan with his school projects, the endless moments of joy and exhaustion that came with raising her children. Those were the moments that defined her, not Michael's distorted version of her worth. When the judge called for a recess, Sophia rose on shaky legs. Rachel guided her to a quiet corner, her hand reassuring on Sophia's arm. Don't let him get to you, Rachel said firmly. He's trying to rattle you because he knows he can't win on the truth alone. Sophia nodded, her resolve solidifying. The truth was on her side. But more than that, she had a strength that Michael couldn't touch. It wasn't loud or ostentatious. It was quiet, steady, and unyielding. As the recess ended and the courtroom filled again, Sophia squared her shoulders. She wasn't the woman Michael thought she was, the woman he had dismissed as weak and dependent. She was stronger than she had ever been. And she was ready to prove it to herself, her children, and the world. The first part of Sophia's journey was over. But the battle was just beginning. She had taken the first step toward reclaiming her life. And she knew there was no turning back. The courtroom felt heavier as the second session began, the weight of the stakes pressing down on everyone present. Sophia sat at the plaintiff's table, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Her breath was steady, her gaze unwavering. But beneath her calm exterior, her mind raced. The battle was just beginning, and she knew Michael would do everything in his power to paint her as unworthy. Across the room, Michael's attorney rose to present their case. He was sharp, his tailored suit and air of superiority lending him an intimidating presence. His tone was calm but cutting as he addressed the judge. Your Honor, the evidence will show that Mr. Matthews has consistently provided financial stability and emotional support for his family. Mrs. Matthews, on the other hand, lacks the resources and experience needed to maintain such a standard for their children. Sophia's jaw tightened as the attorney launched into a methodical breakdown of her life. He highlighted her lack of recent employment, insinuating that her years as a stay-at-home mother were an indulgence rather than a contribution. He twisted her sacrifices into shortcomings, her dedication into dependency. Rachel stood to counter the claims, her voice clear and unwavering. Your Honor, my client's so-called lack of contribution is a gross mischaracterization. Sophia Matthews chose to prioritize her family, making sacrifices that directly enabled Mr. Matthews' career to flourish. Her contributions may not appear in financial statements, but they are no less valuable. The words were a balm to Sophia's frayed nerves. She glanced back at Ethan and Lily, seated at the back of the courtroom. Ethan's face was impassive, but she could see the tension in his shoulders. Lily, too young to fully understand the gravity of the situation, sat quietly, clutching a small stuffed animal. Michael's attorney smirked, seemingly unfazed. He began presenting his first witness, a financial consultant hired to analyze the Matthews household expenses. The consultant outlined Michael's role as the sole breadwinner, painting Sophia as financially dependent and unprepared to manage the complexities of parenting without him. Sophia gripped the edge of the table, her frustration simmering beneath the surface. She wanted to shout that her value wasn't tied to income or spreadsheets, that raising children and managing a household required its own form of expertise. But she stayed silent, trusting Rachel to speak for her. And Rachel did. When it was her turn to cross-examine, she dismantled the consultant's testimony piece by piece. "You mentioned that Mr. Matthews provided the majority of the family's income," Rachel began, her tone measured. "Can you confirm whether Mrs. Matthews was involved in managing that income, paying bills, budgeting for the children's needs, and ensuring financial stability in the household?" The consultant hesitated, clearly unprepared for the question. "I can't speak to her involvement directly," he admitted. "Exactly," Rachel said, her voice firm. "Your analysis overlooks the intangible labor Mrs. Matthews contributed to their family. Financial contributions are important, yes, but they are only one piece of the puzzle. Parenting and maintaining a stable home require more than a paycheck." Sophia felt a flicker of hope as the consultant faltered. Rachel's confidence was contagious. And for the first time that day, Sophia allowed herself to believe that they could win. But Michael wasn't done. His attorney turned the focus to Sophia's emotional stability, bringing up past arguments and painting her as unreliable. "Your Honor, we believe Mrs. Matthews' recent struggles indicate a lack of emotional fitness to provide for her children. Stability requires a clear, focused mind, something Mrs. Matthews has failed to demonstrate." Sophia's stomach twisted as the attorney's words hung in the air. She knew Michael had been planting seeds of doubt for months, not just in the courtroom but in Ethan's mind as well. Ethan had grown distant, questioning her decisions, echoing Michael's criticisms. The thought of losing him to Michael's manipulation was unbearable. Rachel stood again, her voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "My client has faced unimaginable challenges, yet she has remained a steadfast mother to Ethan and Lily. We will demonstrate her resilience and prove that she is more than capable of providing a loving, stable home." The courtroom buzzed with whispers as Rachel introduced their first piece of evidence, a letter written by Ethan to Sophia on Mother's Day years ago. In it, he described how much he admired her strength and kindness, calling her the glue that holds our family together. As the letter was read aloud, Sophia stole a glance at Ethan. His expression softened, a flicker of recognition in his eyes. For a moment, the walls Michael had built between them seemed to crack. The session continued, each side trading arguments like blows in a boxing match. Michael's attorney brought up Sophia's lack of recent employment again, but Rachel countered with evidence of her investments in a tech company, a portfolio she had managed independently and successfully. By the end of the day, the tension in the courtroom was palpable. As the judge called for another recess, Sophia stood on shaky legs. Rachel placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "We're holding our ground," she said. "But they'll come at you harder tomorrow. Be ready." Sophia nodded, her resolve hardening. She wasn't just fighting for custody. She was fighting for her dignity, for her children, and for the truth of who she was. As she left the courtroom, she caught a glimpse of Michael speaking with his attorney, his smirk firmly in place. But Sophia didn't flinch. She wasn't the woman he thought she was, the woman he had dismissed and underestimated. She was stronger than that. And she was ready for whatever came next. Sophia sat in her small kitchen that night, the quiet hum of the refrigerator the only sound breaking the silence. The courtroom had drained her, yet her mind refused to rest. Her thoughts were consumed by Ethan, her teenage son, whose once bright eyes had grown distant in recent months. She remembered when they used to sit together at the kitchen table, laughing as they worked on his school projects or talked about his dreams of becoming an engineer. But now, his laughter was rare, replaced by a guarded silence that she knew wasn't entirely his own. Michael had been whispering in Ethan's ear for months. "Your mother can't handle this," he would say, planting doubts that slowly took root. Sophia could feel Ethan slipping away, his trust in her eroded by the man she once trusted most. Her phone buzzed, pulling her from her thoughts. It was a text from Ethan. "Dad says I should stay with him. He says you're too busy to take care of us." Is that true? The words hit Sophia like a punch to the gut. She gripped the phone tightly, her vision blurring as tears welled in her eyes. She wanted to scream, to call Michael and demand he stop filling their son's head with lies. But instead, she took a deep breath and composed herself. She typed back, "No, sweetheart. That's not true. I'll explain everything when I see you. Please don't believe everything Dad says." As she pressed send, she felt a wave of helplessness wash over her. Michael's influence loomed large, his manipulations calculated and relentless. But Sophia knew she couldn't let herself be consumed by fear. She had to find a way to reach Ethan, to remind him of the bond they had shared before Michael's lies began to wedge them apart. The next day in court, the tension was thick as the session resumed. Michael's attorney continued his assault, attempting to paint Sophia as emotionally unstable and incapable of providing for her children. Sophia listened in silence, her hands clenched tightly under the table. But then Rachel stood, her presence commanding as she addressed the judge. "My client is more than capable of raising her children," Rachel said, her voice steady and firm. "And we will demonstrate that her love, resilience, and dedication have always been at the heart of this family. No amount of manipulation can erase that." Rachel began presenting evidence to refute Michael's claims, including testimonies from friends and neighbors who had witnessed Sophia's devotion to Ethan and Lily over the years. But it was Ethan's presence in the courtroom that drew everyone's attention. Sophia turned to see her son sitting in the back, his head down, fidgeting with his hands. She could feel his conflict from across the room, the pull between loyalty to his father and the love he still held for her. Her heart ached for him, knowing how much he was struggling. The session pressed on. But it wasn't until the lunch break that a glimmer of hope appeared. Sophia was sitting in the hallway outside the courtroom when Ethan approached her. He hesitated, his hands shoved deep into his pockets, before finally speaking. "Mom," he said, his voice quiet. "Can I ask you something?" Sophia looked up, her heart pounding. "Of course. Sweetheart. You can ask me anything. Why does Dad say you're not ready to take care of us?" Ethan's words were careful, but there was a vulnerability in his tone that told Sophia he was searching for answers, not judgment. She took a deep breath, her voice trembling but steady. "Ethan, your dad and I see things differently, but I need you to know that I love you and Lily more than anything in this world. Everything I've ever done has been for you too. I just want you to have a home where you feel safe and loved." Ethan's gaze met hers, and for the first time in months, she saw a flicker of understanding. "I don't know who to believe," he admitted. "Dad says you're too busy with this whole court thing to take care of us. But I remember when you used to help me with my homework or when you stayed up all night when I was sick. That doesn't sound like someone who doesn't care." Sophia's throat tightened, her emotions threatening to overwhelm her. "I'm still that person, Ethan," she said softly, "and I'll always be here for you, no matter what." Their conversation was interrupted as the court session resumed. But that moment stayed with Sophia. It was small, a crack in the wall Michael had built between them, but it was enough to give her hope. As the session progressed, Michael's attorney brought up a new accusation, claiming that Sophia's financial situation was unsustainable. But Rachel was ready. She introduced a financial portfolio Sophia had managed independently, highlighting her resourcefulness and foresight. Michael's confident facade began to falter. His smirk wavered, and he leaned in to whisper urgently to his attorney. It was clear they hadn't anticipated Sophia's preparedness. The day ended with the judge calling for a recess. But the energy in the courtroom had shifted. Sophia felt it as she walked out into the crisp New York evening. She glanced back at Ethan, who lingered near the door. "Ethan," she called softly. He turned, hesitating for a moment before walking toward her. "I'll see you tomorrow," he said quietly, his voice carrying a hint of something she hadn't heard in a long time: trust. As Sophia watched him leave, she felt a spark of hope reignite within her. Michael's lies might have sown doubt, but the truth was beginning to break through. This wasn't just about winning custody anymore. It was about rebuilding the bond with her children, piece by piece, no matter how long it took. The courtroom buzzed with whispers the next morning, the energy palpable as the proceedings entered a critical phase. Sophia sat at her table, her focus sharp. The previous day had been grueling, but something had shifted. Ethan's words lingered in her mind, his tentative trust giving her the strength she needed. Today, she wasn't just defending herself, she was beginning to uncover the cracks in Michael's carefully constructed facade. Rachel stood to address the judge, her tone calm but brimming with authority. "Your Honor, we have uncovered evidence that challenges Mr. Matthews' financial integrity and directly impacts his credibility as a fit guardian." At Rachel's signal, a bailiff handed a thick folder to the judge. The room hushed as she began explaining the contents. "We have documentation of Mr. Matthews transferring funds to offshore accounts over the past 3 years. These transactions, while individually small enough to avoid suspicion, collectively amount to significant sums. The purpose of these transfers remains unclear, but the pattern raises serious questions about his financial transparency." Michael's attorney sprang to his feet. "Your Honor, these allegations are baseless and irrelevant to the custody proceedings." Rachel turned to the judge, her expression unwavering. "Your Honor, this evidence speaks to Mr. Matthews' character and his willingness to deceive. If he has hidden this from his spouse and the courts, how can we trust him to be transparent and honest in the care of his children?" The judge nodded. "I'll allow it. Proceed." The room buzzed with murmurs as Rachel continued. "This is not a matter of 1 or 2 transactions. It's a pattern of behavior. We will demonstrate how Mr. Matthews has manipulated his financial records and withheld resources that should have supported his family." Sophia felt her pulse quicken. She glanced across the room at Michael. For the first time, his smug confidence seemed to falter. His attorney leaned in, whispering urgently, but Michael's clenched jaw and rigid posture betrayed his discomfort. Rachel then called her first witness, a former employee of Michael's company, who had come forward anonymously but agreed to testify in person. Philip, a nervous man in his mid-40s, took the stand. He shifted uncomfortably as he was sworn in, but once he began speaking, the weight of the truth seemed to steady him. Mr. Matthews was strategic. Philip began, choosing his words carefully. He presented himself as ethical. But behind closed doors, things were different. He created shell companies to funnel money into accounts that didn't appear in official records. Those funds were never declared or accounted for. The courtroom fell silent, the air thick with tension. Michael's attorney leapt to his feet again. "Objection. This testimony is speculative at best." Rachel countered immediately, her voice sharp. "Your Honor, we have corroborating documentation. This witness is simply providing context." The judge gestured for Philip to continue. "Please stick to the facts, Mr. Lawson." Philip nodded, his voice gaining strength. "The accounts were offshore, and the amounts were always just under the threshold that would trigger reporting requirements. It was deliberate. And when I questioned it," he hesitated, glancing at Michael. "When I questioned it, I was told to keep quiet if I valued my job." Sophia's stomach churned. She had always suspected Michael of hiding things, but hearing the extent of his deceit was still a blow. She looked back at Ethan and Lily. Ethan's eyes were wide, his face pale, while Lily clung to her stuffed animal, her small frame tense. Rachel presented the supporting documents, spreadsheets, emails, and transaction records. Each piece of evidence was meticulously organized, painting a picture of years of calculated dishonesty. Michael's attorney struggled to object. Each argument dismantled by Rachel's preparation. By the time the session broke for lunch, the tide had visibly turned. Michael sat rigid, his face pale. As his attorney whispered frantically, Sophia allowed herself a moment to breathe. The battle was far from over. But for the first time, she felt like they were gaining ground. Outside the courtroom, Sophia found Ethan waiting for her. His expression was conflicted. But there was something else, a glimmer of belief. "Mom," he said hesitantly, "was all of that true? About Dad?" Sophia crouched to meet his eyes. "I wish it wasn't." "Ethan," she said softly. "But yes. It's true. I never wanted you to see this side of him. But I can't let him keep hurting us." Ethan nodded slowly, the weight of the revelations settling over him. "I don't know what to think. He's my dad." "But," he trailed off, his voice breaking. Sophia reached out, placing a hand on his shoulder. "It's okay to feel confused, Ethan. I know this is hard. But I need you to remember that I love you. Everything I'm doing is to protect you and Lily." His eyes glistened with unshed tears. And for a moment, he simply stood there, absorbing her words. Then he nodded, his voice barely above a whisper. "I believe you, Mom." The words were like a lifeline, pulling Sophia out of the darkness she had been navigating for months. She wrapped him in a tight hug, her heart swelling with both love and determination. When court resumed, Rachel introduced the next piece of evidence, a recording of Michael discussing his intent to fabricate evidence against Sophia. The audio played in the courtroom, Michael's voice cold and calculating. "We need to find something, anything, that discredits her. I don't care what it takes." The room erupted in gasps. Michael's attorney stood, his face flushed, scrambling for an objection. But the damage was done. Sophia glanced at Michael. His face was stone, but the cracks in his composure were unmistakable. As the session ended, Sophia walked out into the chilly afternoon air, her resolve stronger than ever. Michael's lies were unraveling. And for the first time, the truth was shining through. She wasn't just surviving this battle, she was winning. And she wasn't going to stop until her children were safe, her dignity restored, and the life Michael had tried to take from her was firmly back in her hands. The morning of the final day in court dawned grey and overcast, the sky mirroring the tension Sophia felt deep in her chest. She dressed carefully, selecting a soft blue blouse that Ethan had once said brought out her eyes. It was a small reminder of the bond they shared, a connection she was determined to protect no matter what. Rachel picked her up early to review the day's plan. The air in the car was quiet but charged, the silence broken only by the occasional rustle of papers as Rachel double-checked her notes. "Today is critical," Rachel said, her voice steady but firm. "Michael's unraveling, and we need to press our advantage. Stay composed. The judge needs to see your strength." Sophia nodded, clasping her hands tightly in her lap. Her thoughts drifted to Ethan and Lily, who would be arriving later with a family friend. They had endured so much over the past months, caught in the crossfire of a battle they hadn't asked for. She was determined to show them that this fight was for them, that their stability, love, and future were worth every ounce of her strength. The courtroom was packed when they arrived. Word of the case had spread, and reporters filled the back rows, their notebooks and cameras poised for the day's drama. Michael was already seated, his posture stiff, his jaw set in a tight line. His attorney leaned in, speaking quickly, but Michael's gaze was fixed straight ahead, unblinking. The proceedings began with Rachel introducing the final piece of evidence, a detailed ledger linking Michael's offshore accounts to fraudulent business practices. She explained the chain of deceit, walking the judge through each transaction with precision. The courtroom buzzed with whispers as the weight of the evidence settled over the room. Michael's attorney stood, his voice sharp as he tried to deflect. "Your Honor, This is an attempt to malign my client's character. These allegations are irrelevant to the custody case. But Rachel was ready. Your Honor. This evidence speaks directly to Mr. Matthews' judgment and his ability to provide a stable environment for his children. Financial misconduct of this magnitude cannot be ignored. The judge nodded. Her expression serious. Proceed. Sophia stole a glance at Michael. The cracks in his facade were deepening. His confident smirk was gone, replaced by a tight-lipped grimace. He leaned back in his chair, his hands gripping the armrests as though they were the only thing keeping him grounded. Then came the most shocking moment of the day. Rachel called an unexpected witness, a whistleblower who had worked closely with Michael. It was David Harper, a former accountant from Michael's firm, and his presence sent a ripple through the courtroom. Michael's face drained of color as David was sworn in. He avoided looking at him, but the tension in his posture was palpable. David's testimony was damning. He described in detail how Michael had manipulated accounts, laundered money through shell companies, and lied to investors. He thought he was untouchable, David said, his voice steady but tinged with regret. But I couldn't stay silent anymore. What he did wasn't just unethical, it was illegal. Michael's attorney objected. But the damage was done. The judge allowed David's testimony to stand, and the weight of his words hung heavy in the air. Sophia sat motionless, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She had suspected Michael was hiding something, but hearing the full extent of his deceit was staggering. She glanced back at Ethan and Lily, who had arrived quietly during the testimony. Ethan's face was pale, his expression a mixture of shock and sadness. Lily sat close to him, clutching her stuffed animal with wide, worried eyes. As the session progressed, Michael's composure crumbled further. When Rachel played a recording of Michael discussing his bribe attempt to sway the court, the room erupted in gasps. His attorney looked visibly shaken, whispering frantically to Michael. But there was no escaping the truth. The judge leaned forward, her voice firm. Mr. Matthews, the evidence against you is substantial. This court takes these matters very seriously. The tension reached its peak when Michael's attorney stood abruptly, turning to face the judge. Your Honor, he said, his tone tight with frustration. In light of today's revelations, I must withdraw from representing Mr. Matthews. I cannot, in good conscience, continue to defend a client who has misled both me and this court. The courtroom fell silent, the weight of the statement settling over everyone. Michael shot out of his seat, his voice rising in desperation. You can't quit. This isn't over. But it was. The judge called for order, her gavel striking sharply against the wood. Mr. Matthews, control yourself, or I will hold you in contempt of court. As the session concluded, the judge announced her ruling. Mrs. Sophia Matthews, this court awards you full custody of Ethan and Lily Matthews. Furthermore, Mr. Matthews' financial misconduct and attempts to manipulate these proceedings will be referred to the proper authorities for further investigation. His accounts will be frozen, and restitution payments will be determined by the relevant courts. Sophia exhaled sharply, a rush of relief washing over her. Tears welled in her eyes as she turned to Ethan and Lily, who ran into her arms. We did it, she whispered, her voice trembling. We're going to be okay. As they left the courthouse, reporters swarmed them, shouting questions. Sophia paused, holding Ethan and Lily close. She met the cameras with a calm, steady gaze. This was never about revenge, she said. It was about protecting my children and standing up for what's right. Justice may take time, but it's always worth fighting for. As she walked away, the weight of the battle lifted. There would be healing ahead, challenges still to face. But for the first time in years, Sophia felt free. She had reclaimed her life, her dignity, and her future. She had won, not just for herself, but for the family she loved more than anything. The air outside the courthouse was crisp and cool, carrying with it a sense of new beginnings. Sophia stood on the courthouse steps, holding Ethan and Lily close, the chaos of reporters and cameras fading into the background. For the first time in years, she felt the weight of uncertainty lifting, replaced by a quiet, steady sense of freedom. The legal battle was over. But Sophia knew her journey was far from complete. The real work, rebuilding their lives, was just beginning. That evening, back in the modest apartment she now called home, Sophia sat with Ethan and Lily at the kitchen table. The three of them shared a simple meal, laughing softly as Lily described a picture she had drawn during the court session. It was a crayon depiction of their family, standing together under a bright blue sky. "This is us," Lily said proudly, sliding the drawing toward Sophia. "Happy." Sophia's throat tightened as she looked at the drawing. The innocence and hope in Lily's small voice reminded her of why she had fought so hard. "It's beautiful, sweetheart," she said, pulling Lily into a tight hug. "Just like you." Ethan sat quietly, picking at his food. Sophia could see the conflict still lingering in his eyes. He had been through so much, torn between the love he felt for his parents and the harsh truths he had learned about his father. She reached across the table, gently placing her hand over his. "You've been so strong, Ethan," she said softly. "I know this hasn't been easy, but I'm proud of you. More than you'll ever know." Ethan looked up, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I'm sorry, Mom," he whispered, "for believing him, for doubting you." Sophia shook her head, her voice firm but tender. "You don't have to apologize, Ethan. Your dad, he's your dad. I understand why you wanted to believe him. But what matters now is that we're here, together, and we'll figure everything out as a family." Ethan nodded, a small, hesitant smile breaking through the weight of his emotions. As the days turned into weeks, Sophia began to piece together the fragments of her life. The apartment, though small, felt warm and safe. She found a part-time job at a local design firm, rediscovering the creative passion she had set aside years ago. The steady rhythm of work gave her a sense of purpose, a reminder of her own capabilities. But it wasn't enough for Sophia to rebuild her own life. She felt a growing pull to help others, women like her, who had faced battles they never imagined fighting and needed a way forward. One evening, as she flipped through a blank sketchbook, an idea took root. The next morning, she reached out to a local community center and pitched a proposal, a workshop for single mothers, focused on building skills, confidence, and support networks. To her surprise, the center embraced the idea with enthusiasm, offering her a space to host the sessions. Sophia threw herself into planning, channeling the lessons she had learned from her own struggles into something tangible. She designed practical exercises for budgeting, career building, and self-care, but she also carved out time for sharing stories and offering emotional support. On the first day of the workshop, the room buzzed with nervous energy as women of all ages filed in. Some carried young children, others came alone, their faces etched with quiet determination. Sophia stood at the front of the room, her hands trembling slightly as she welcomed them. "This isn't just a workshop," she said, her voice steady despite her nerves. "It's a place to find strength, not just in yourself, but in each other. We all have scars, but those scars mean we've survived. And together, we can do more than survive. We can thrive." The women listened intently, their expressions softening as Sophia shared her story. She spoke of sacrifice and betrayal, of the pain of being underestimated, and the power of reclaiming her worth. By the end of the session, the room felt lighter, filled with a sense of hope that had been absent at the start. Over the next few weeks, the workshops grew in both size and impact. Sophia watched with pride as women began to open up, supporting one another in ways that went beyond the classroom. Friendships formed, laughter became a regular soundtrack, and the quiet courage of the group began to ripple outward into the community. One afternoon, as Sophia was setting up for a session. Rachel walked in, holding an envelope. "You've got a new sponsor," Rachel said, her eyes gleaming with excitement. Sophia opened the envelope carefully, her breath catching as she read the letter. The sponsor was none other than Charles Bennett, a renowned tech entrepreneur who had quietly followed her case during the trial. The letter spoke of his admiration for her courage and his desire to help expand the workshops nationwide. Sophia sat down, the enormity of the opportunity washing over her. This could change everything," she murmured. Rachel smiled, her pride evident. "It already has. Sophia. You've inspired people in ways you can't even imagine. This is just the next step." As the months passed, the workshops flourished, reaching women in cities far beyond their small community. Sophia found herself speaking at events, sharing her journey with larger audiences. Her story, once defined by struggle, had become a beacon of hope and resilience. But her favorite moments were still the quiet ones at home, where she could sit with Ethan and Lily, the three of them piecing together a future filled with love and possibility. One evening, Ethan approached her with a hesitant smile. "Mom, I've been thinking. Maybe I could help with the workshops. You know, talk to kids who've been through stuff like Lily and me." Sophia's heart swelled. "I think that's a wonderful idea, Ethan," she said, pulling him into a hug. "You've got so much to share, and I couldn't be prouder of you." The road ahead wasn't without challenges, but Sophia knew they would face them together. With each passing day, she was reminded of the simple but powerful truth that had carried her through the darkest moments. Resilience isn't just about enduring, it's about rising, stronger and more determined than ever before. Sophia sat at her kitchen table one quiet evening, flipping through the pages of an old sketchbook. The drawings were faint, worn by time, but they carried memories of a life she had once imagined. She lingered on a sketch of a tree, its roots deep and strong, its branches stretching skyward despite the weight of a storm. Beneath it, she had written the words, "Strength lies in the roots." For years, Sophia had felt uprooted, her identity tied to the roles of wife and mother, her own dreams sacrificed for a life she thought was built on love and partnership. But now, as she traced the lines of that tree with her fingertip, she realized she had been strong all along. Even when the storm of betrayal and loss threatened to break her, she had held firm. Her phone buzzed, pulling her from her thoughts. She hesitated before picking it up, her breath catching as she read the message. It was from Ethan. "Mom, I think I need to see Dad. I need to understand why he did what he did." Sophia's heart ached as she reread the words. She had always known this moment would come, that Ethan would need answers only Michael could provide. But the idea of him confronting his father stirred a protective instinct deep within her. The next morning, Sophia found Ethan sitting on the couch, his face serious but calm. "Are you sure about this?" she asked gently, sitting beside him. Ethan nodded. I need to hear it from him. I need to know why he lied to us." Sophia placed a hand on his shoulder, her touch firm but comforting. "Okay," she said softly. "We'll go together." The drive to the prison was quiet, the hum of the car engine the only sound between them. Sophia stole glances at Ethan, his expression unreadable as he stared out the window. When they arrived, the sterile atmosphere of the visitation room hit Sophia like a wave. The stark grey walls and harsh fluorescent lighting seemed to strip away any warmth, leaving only the cold reality of where they were. Michael entered the room, his once impeccable appearance now worn and disheveled. He paused when he saw them, his gaze lingering on Ethan before he slowly took a seat across the table. "Hey, son," Michael said, his voice strained. Ethan sat stiffly, his hands clenched in his lap. "Why?" he asked, his voice low but steady. "Why did you lie? Why did you hurt Mom? Why did you hurt us?" Michael's shoulders sagged under the weight of the questions. He ran a hand through his graying hair, his expression a mixture of guilt and frustration. I thought I was doing what was best for all of us, he said finally. I let my ambition get the better of me. And I lost sight of what really mattered. Ethan's eyes narrowed. That's not an answer, he said firmly. You didn't have to hurt us to chase your ambition. You chose to. Sophia watched her son, pride swelling in her chest. He spoke with a clarity and strength that belied his age, his words cutting through Michael's excuses like a blade. Michael looked away, his hands clasping tightly together. You're right, he admitted after a long pause. I did choose to. And it was the wrong choice. I let my pride and anger take over. And I hurt the people I cared about most. Ethan's expression softened. But only slightly. You didn't just hurt us, he said quietly. You made me doubt Mom. And she's the one who's always been there for us. Michael's gaze shifted to Sophia. His face filled with something that looked like regret. I know, he said. His voice barely above a whisper. I see that now. The conversation ended shortly after. The weight of the unspoken lingering as Sophia and Ethan left the prison. The drive home was just as quiet as the drive there. But this time, the silence felt different, less heavy, more contemplative. Later that evening, Ethan sat across from Sophia at the kitchen table. His expression was thoughtful. His voice quiet but steady. I think I needed that, he said. Hearing him admit it. It doesn't make it okay. But it helps. Sophia reached across the table, taking his hand in hers. I'm proud of you, Ethan, she said, her voice thick with emotion. You faced something really hard today, and you didn't let it break you. Ethan nodded, his grip tightening briefly before he let go. I think I'm ready to move on, he said. I just want us to be happy again. Sophia smiled, a tear slipping down her cheek. We will be, she promised. We already are. The next morning, Sophia received a letter in the mail. She recognized Michael's handwriting immediately, her heart sinking as she opened it. The words inside were a strange mix of apology and self-justification. Michael acknowledged her victory in court but minimized his own faults, chalking them up to ambition gone astray. He ended the letter with a simple line, "You've done right by Ethan and Lily. I hope one day you can forgive me." Sophia folded the letter carefully, tucking it away in a drawer. Forgiveness wasn't for Michael, it was for herself. And while she wasn't there yet, she knew she would be one day. That afternoon, as the sun streamed through the apartment windows, Sophia sat with Ethan and Lily on the living room floor. They played a card game Lily had invented, their laughter filling the small space with warmth. For the first time in years, Sophia felt a sense of peace. The storm had passed, and while the scars it left would never fully fade, they no longer defined her. Her roots had held firm, and now, they were growing stronger than ever. The community center buzzed with quiet excitement as Sophia prepared for the largest workshop she had ever hosted. The once small gathering of single mothers had grown into a movement, a sanctuary for women seeking strength and support. Rows of folding chairs lined the room, and tables were scattered with notebooks, pens, and coffee cups. A banner hung overhead, its message simple but powerful: together, we rise. Sophia stood at the front of the room, her hands resting on the podium. She glanced out at the faces before her, some familiar, others new. Each one carried a story, a journey of resilience and courage. For a moment, she felt a pang of nervousness. But then she spotted Ethan and Lily near the back of the room. Ethan gave her a small nod of encouragement, and Lily waved enthusiastically, her stuffed animal clutched tightly in her arms. Taking a deep breath, Sophia began. Thank you all for being here today, she said, her voice steady. When I first started these workshops, I wasn't sure if anyone would show up. But what I've learned over the past year is that strength doesn't come from standing alone, it comes from standing together. The room was silent, the weight of her words settling over the crowd. Sophia continued, sharing her journey with raw honesty. She spoke of the betrayal she had endured, the legal battle she had fought, and the love that had carried her through it all. She described how the workshops had become a lifeline, not just for the women who attended but for herself as well. These sessions aren't just about learning new skills, she said. They're about rediscovering who we are, about finding the courage to rebuild and the determination to keep going, no matter how many times life knocks us down. As Sophia spoke, she noticed a young woman in the front row wiping away tears. The woman reminded her of herself a year ago, lost, uncertain, but holding on to a sliver of hope. Sophia's heart swelled with empathy. She knew that look, and she knew the strength that could emerge from it. After the session, the young woman approached her. "Ms. Matthews," she said hesitantly, "I just wanted to thank you. Hearing your story, it makes me feel like I can get through this too." Sophia smiled, her voice gentle. "You can. And you will. Just remember, you don't have to do it alone." That evening, as Sophia packed up the room, Ethan came to help. He carried a stack of chairs to the corner, his movements purposeful. When he finished, he turned to her, a thoughtful expression on his face. "Mom," he began, "I was thinking, maybe I could help out more. Like, talk to kids who've been through stuff like Lily and me. Maybe they'd listen to someone their age." Sophia's eyes widened, her heart swelling with pride. "Ethan, that's a wonderful idea," she said, pulling him into a hug. "You have so much to share. I think you'd be amazing at it." He smiled, his usual quiet confidence shining through. "Thanks, Mom. I want to make a difference." Sophia watched him walk away, her heart full. Ethan had grown so much over the past year, finding his voice and his strength in ways she hadn't anticipated. In the months that followed, the workshops continued to expand. Word spread about Sophia's program, and soon, women from neighboring towns and cities began reaching out. Sophia's inbox overflowed with messages from women sharing their stories and asking how they could get involved. Then came the letter that would change everything. It arrived in a sleek envelope, the kind that hinted at something important. Sophia opened it carefully, her breath catching as she read the contents. It was an invitation to speak at a national conference on women's empowerment, hosted by none other than Charles Bennett, the tech entrepreneur who had supported her workshops from the start. The conference was held in a grand ballroom in Washington, D.C., its opulent decor a sharp contrast to the humble community center where Sophia's journey had begun. She stood behind the podium, the crowd of influential philanthropists and business leaders watching her intently. "My name is Sophia Matthews," she began, her voice resonating through the room. "And I'm here today because I believe in the power of resilience. I believe in the strength we find not just within ourselves but in the communities we build. My story isn't unique, it's the story of countless women who have faced adversity and chosen to rise above it." Sophia spoke candidly, weaving her personal experiences with the stories of the women who had attended her workshops. She highlighted the importance of support systems, the value of perseverance, and the profound impact of empathy. When she finished, the room erupted into applause. Several attendees approached her afterward, pledging their support for her program. Charles Bennett himself shook her hand, his expression one of admiration. "You've created something incredible, Sophia," he said. "Let's talk about how we can take this nationwide." Sophia's heart raced with excitement. She had never imagined her journey would lead her here. But as she looked around the room, she felt a deep sense of purpose. That night, back in her hotel room, Sophia sat by the window, gazing out at the city lights. She thought of Ethan and Lily, of the women she had met, and of the challenges she had overcome. Her father's words echoed in her mind, "Strength lies in the roots." She smiled, her resolve unwavering. The path ahead was filled with possibilities, and for the first time, she felt ready to embrace them. Sophia's journey had started with a battle for her children, but it had become so much more. It was a testament to the power of resilience, the importance of love, and the strength found in community. And as she closed her eyes that night, she knew this was only the beginning. Sophia Matthews' journey was one of resilience, love, and transformation. From the courtroom battles to the quiet moments of rebuilding her life, she proved that strength lies not in avoiding adversity, but in rising above it. She reclaimed her identity, her dignity, and her family, becoming a beacon of hope for others facing their own storms. Through her workshops, she empowered countless women, showing them that no matter how broken they might feel, they could rebuild and thrive. Her children, Ethan and Lily, flourished in the stability and love she worked so hard to provide. Together, they became a family not defined by their past but strengthened by it. Sophia's story reminds us that even in the darkest times, there is light to be found in love, perseverance, and community. It's a testament to the power of choosing to rise, no matter how many times life tries to pull us down. If Sophia's journey inspired you, we invite you to join us for more tales of courage, hope, and transformation. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to Life Stories for more stories that uplift and inspire. Thank you for being part of this journey with us. See you in the next story.